What's going on, guys? Andrew of New Bar Gaming back here, and today we're going to be talking about some Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains episode 85. Now, this episode primarily revolved around a duel between Blue Maiden and Haru. Now, I didn't really find this duel all that interesting. I found it to be mainly relatively one-sided for the most part. Didn't feel like there were a whole lot of unpredictable twists or turns, and the deck strategies felt very straightforward in my mind. On the one hand, you had Haru basically using a discount version of the tactics Bowman usually uses with a Hydro Drive deck, and on top of that, I'm kind of biased against the Hydro Drive deck to begin with. I don't find tactics where you're essentially blocking all monsters of a single attribute from using their abilities to be all that interesting to watch in action, because it just feels very straightforward, very predictable to me. I mean, and we've already seen this deck several times, and unlike a character, say, like Soulburner, Revolver, or Playmaker, whose strategies seem to be constantly changing, Haru's once more just kind of felt like a simplified version of Bowman's strategy without a whole lot going on. Basically, once more, negate a bunch of monster effects, play link arrows, and then just hit your opponent with a giant beat stick, because all your monsters' attacks are doubled. So then moving on to the other side of the duel, we do have Blue Maiden, and she did actually add a little bit of spice here, because now she's sporting a Marincess deck as opposed to her previous Trickstar deck. Kind of have mixed feelings here. On the one hand, Trickstars I thought had a really neat strategy, and basically they took Burn and made an entire deck around it, which is really kind of cool, especially from a TCG perspective, even if it does drive me a bit nuts playing against the deck, especially considering in its early days you could OTK your opponent relatively consistently via Burn. But at the same time, it was neat to see some more variety added to the game, and in the duels themselves. It's not often we've seen in Yu-Gi-Oh! A character that isn't an antagonist that's kind of like a one-off, using a burn strategy, and Aoi was doing it in a pretty interesting manner. So I thought that was kind of cool to see in action. On the other plus side of Trickstars, we also have the fact that they're still a pretty relevant deck in the TCG. So if they're staying relevant in the TCG, Konami is a little bit more likely to continue to support those cards and keep printing them. And if that's the case, well, they're probably more likely to keep, Blue Angel, Blue Maiden, or Aoi, whatever form she's taking at the given time, as a more relevant character within the show. And as you guys know, if you've watched any of my reviews, I'm very much in favor of them trying to write their female characters better in the show and keep them relevant to the plot. So far, I think they've done okay with Aoi, and I thought the Trickstar deck was kind of helping to sustain the life of her character within the show. Now, on the other side of that, it does show character growth in my eyes. When they have characters change decks in Yu-Gi-Oh!, a lot of times it is kind of reflecting a change in their personality, such as with Zane Truesdale. He went from being this really bright, overseeing mentor who was good for basically everybody else to look up to. He was very quiet, very confident, and very powerful, but he didn't necessarily boast about it with his Cyber Dragons. Switches to Cyber Dark, becomes super edgy, doesn't care about anyone being hurt in the duels, is literally damaging himself and killing himself by using the deck, and that just is reflected in his deck switch from a light attribute machine monsters that are very controlled, very powerful, usually sets him up for a one-turn kill, versus, one turn kill, not first turn kill, got those terms mixed up a second there, as opposed to the Cyber Darks, which are very aggressive, very power heavy, at least they were portrayed that way in the anime. Aoi here follows a very similar path. The Trickstars represent these monsters that seem very cute, very nice. They're basically using these strategies that are very manipulative. They're kind of dodging combat. It doesn't feel like a quote-unquote very honest deck, if you will. Suppose that these Marincesses are using a much more straightforward strategy from what we've seen. He's kind of building up some monsters' attack. They're playing off support for each other. Heck, even Aoi's new Link summoning chant, which goes something along the lines of Shine, the Circuit of Friendship and Bonds, also reveals this more outward confidence from her. Her character visuals, her new deck, everything just kind of reveals Aoi doesn't feel like she needs to hide behind this character of Blue Angel anymore. She's more willing to show her true self. So I think that kind of works with the development. It plays in well. But that doesn't make up for the fact that I don't feel like the deck is very interesting to watch in action here. And that, once more, mixing that with the fact that I don't find the Hydro Drive very interesting either, everything just kind of felt very bland to this duel to me. But, to be fair, these Marincesses I'm sure we're going to be seeing more of in action. In this duel episode, while it was duel-focused, if you will, as in like the duel was the focal point of what was going on, at the same time, it wasn't really seemed to me like they were trying to write it as this was an epic duel to really show off what both decks can do, what the character's maximum potentials could be. It didn't seem to me like Blue Maiden felt super challenged here. So hopefully we'll be able to see more of that good action down the line. Now, onto the whole idea of Blue Maiden switching decks here, that I kind of have mixed feelings on, not just because I don't find the deck as interesting to watch. Working in favor of her using Trick Stars, I really like the fact that Trick Stars were still relatively relevant in the TCG even to this day. It encourages Konami to keep pushing out support for those cards, and basically in the anime, since they do seem to be at least paying some attention to the anime and TCG relationship this season with Vrains, given how a lot of the characters whose decks are the best in the show are also doing pretty darn well in the TCG, it spells out to me that if Trick Stars continue to do well, it would kind of encourage them to keep Blue Maiden around as being a relevant character. And as many of you guys know, if you've watched my reviews, I am very much in favor of them trying to write their female characters better in Yu-Gi-Oh!, given how in the past they've been inconsistent at best. Also in favor of Trick Stars is the fact that I just thought it was an interesting strategy to watch in action, primarily just because it's burn. How often do we see a burn deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! That isn't just some one-off antagonist that everybody forgets the name of after the episode is over? Not often at all. So this was like a protagonist using it, she was using it in some creative ways, and everything else. So I just thought the Trick Stars were a neat deck for her to have. Now, once more, this new deck of hers makes a lot of sense. It also coincides with the fact that she's working alongside the Aqua Ignis. So maybe these Marincises will come out to be something really cool with time. We just don't know yet. I'm certainly hoping that they end up delivering in that field, especially because I'd really like to see more of Blue Maiden's duels. I'd like to see her come out to be a really strong character. Maybe they're kind of playing to the opposite end of how they usually write the female characters here. Rather than having a super strong start and then a really weak finish, maybe we had a decent start and we're going to have a really strong finish. That's all I can hope for at this point. Now, as for the rest of this episode, the scope more or less focuses around this idea of sibling bonds. Basically, you have two different pairs of siblings clashing through one sibling representative of each within this duel. You have Haru and Bowman versus Aoi and Akira here, more or less. And what's interesting about both of them is neither of these pairs of siblings share a blood bond. You have Haru, who was created as essentially the prototype for what Bowman would be, which is Lightning's ideal combination of humanity and AI, and then you also have Aoi and Akira, who are step-siblings. And so one of the things that Haru goes into this duel with the mindset of is the idea that siblings are nothing more than some role to be filled, and especially if you aren't blood connected, then it really is meaningless. There's no bond there. And that's kind of what he's even preaching to Aoi, and he even is telling Bowman, even as Bowman seems sad to see Haru go and encourages him, don't listen to Lightning, who's, even my creator, I don't want to see you die. And Haru just kind of bolts off and doesn't want to listen to that and explains, I'm an AI, this is my purpose, this is what I've got to do. But by the end of the duel, as Aoi defeats him, he has these flashbacks to very key memories, and I thought this was a relatively heartfelt moment, if you're considering the fact that we have very little introduction to Haru's character before this. We see him shedding some tears as he sees Bowman pull through. We see them watching a sunset together, dreaming about the same future. And there's part of that that's really neat. I like that writing being incorporated here because it gave some weight to Haru's character. I still think they kind of missed the point if they were trying to use him as a build-up character for Blue Maiden, because we haven't seen a lot of Haru in the past, so he sort of feels almost just like slightly above one of the one-off characters that you would see people duel a lot in like Duel Monsters back in the day. He only feels a little bit above that since we didn't have a whole lot with his character before this, but at the same time it makes it a lot easier to kind of feel for the sides of the AI. They can feel together, they have this dream, there's a little bit of an understandability there. We're basically able to connect to the human side of what Lightning's created in that moment. And it makes it so even if we disagree with our ideals, a lot of us can probably agree with the fact that we don't necessarily want to see them die, which is what's happening within Mirror Vrains here. Even Bowman points out that you're within Mirror Vrains. If you lose here, your data is deleted. And that was kind of a casually dropped big plot point moving forward with this show, is if they're dueling here, it's kind of like the equivalent of an old-fashioned shadow duel. If you lose, you're gone for a bit. I mean, it's Yu-Gi-Oh!, so nobody's ever permanently gone, but still, the point lies that these duels have more than the usual amount at stake. Glad they introduced it. I don't know how I feel about the casualness of its introduction. So as for the scope and message of this show on the whole, I kind of got on a little bit of a tangent there. I think it was a good message because essentially we're watching Haru learn the lesson that siblings, while they are a role to fill, there's a lot more to it than that. You don't necessarily have to be blood related to that person, and it's more about the bond that you share, the memories, the experiences that you have together, that connection that forms, and I think Haru's starting to do that. And I think that also gets to the overall point of what Vrains seems to always be hinting at, and that is what defines living and what defines humanity. And this is a big part of humanity, is the different levels of bond that we share with one another, right? So I thought this was decently well handled. Once more, it's the idea that if you're gonna use a character that's barely going to show up before they are trying to deliver a big message like this and kind of act as a pivoting point character for one of our main series of casts in Blue Maiden, then this is decent. But I would have much rather seen a character that we got to watch develop some be used instead of Haru, or honestly just a Haru that we got to watch develop some. We knew almost nothing about this character before this episode occurred, and it's basically just the few flashbacks we got here we have to build off of with him. So with that being said, guys, that's going to about wrap up my thoughts on this episode. So let's talk a little bit about the preview we got at the end here for the next episode, and that is Spectre versus Lightning. Super excited to see that duel in action. I thought Spectre was really fun to watch duel in the past. Biggest issue is I have a feeling Spectre's going to get his face stomped into the ground because, once more, Lightning is one of our primary antagonists. I'm not fully convinced Bowman's always going to be an antagonist in this arc yet either, which would basically just leave Lightning left to take his place. So seeing him lose to Spectre would feel somewhat anticlimactic to me, unless they're going to go with the approach of, you know, Spectre wins his duel, Aoi wins her duel, everybody wins, and then everybody ends up facing Bowman. Bowman defeats everybody except Playmaker, and then you have this great final match. That's one way to go about it, but I'm more so seeing the idea that, you know, we're gradually seeing people from both sides picked off. The overall vibe I get from this arc is still very reminiscent of the Barry and Onslaught arc in my mind, and that would kind of go in line with that, in that you have people from both sides kind of falling until you eventually narrow it down to the two leaders facing off. So with all that being said, guys, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe down below. If you have any thoughts, theories, or comments, be sure to leave them in the comments section. And if you did not enjoy the video, constructive criticism is always welcome. And I'll catch you guys next time with some more Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains reviews.